From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Kansas Week.
They've begged, pleaded, and demanded, showing up every week this session. This week, survivors of child sexual abuse finally got to have their say about the state's statute of limitations on prosecutions. Plus, the governor says no to vouchers, but what does that mean for a bill some call vouchers but others call choice? But first, the House passes a bill funding K-12 education. So why did the debate include things like property taxes, Narcan, and Keisha policies? That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. I'm Pilar Pedraza, and this is Kansas Week. It was a busy week at the State House as committees rushed to finish their jobs for the year, and lawmakers spent several long days on the House and Senate floors. One of the hotly debated issues, the House's education funding bill.
In the words of Forrest Gump, it's like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get, because this is a bundle.
She's talking about the 9 bills bundled together with the education budget and House substitute for SB 113, debated on the Kansas House floor this last week. The Kansas Reflector reports that bundle included policy, allowing private school students to take part in extracurricular activities at public schools and expanding opportunities for more than 24 wealthy districts to raise taxes to increase salaries of teachers. Representative Christy Williams, chair of the K-12 Education Budget Committee, told the House every element in the bill had had a full hearing before coming together into one bill for the floor to debate. Despite strong Republican support, not all members of the Grand Old Party liked the measure. Representative Brent Fairchild said he voted against the bill because it would increase K-12 spending by about $600 million over the next 2 years and mandated about $30 million in spending above that required by the state Supreme Court's expectations. Several lawmakers tried to amend the bill. Representative Mary Lynn Poskin wanted to add $592 million in special education funding. Representative Bill Clifford wanted additional $76 million for districts that deal with high numbers of at-risk students. And Representative Jason Probst wanted to let districts use portions of state grants to pay for Narcan to treat students experiencing a drug overdose. All those efforts failed. The bill passed the House on a final vote of 75 to 48.
With our steadfast financial commitment in Kansas, the legislature maintains the tradition of coupling constitutional funding with policy to ensure ongoing accountability, ongoing transparency, and bipartisan efforts to expand educational opportunities for all Kansas students.
And joining us this week, we have State Representative Christy Williams, who you just saw up there. She has agreed to be on set with us. She is our Republican. We also have Dion Leffler, the opinion editor with the Wichita Eagle, with us this week. Now, a quick note, we were also scheduled to have a Democrat here this week. Unfortunately, he had a family emergency and could not join us. So, talking about all of this education funding, I'm going to get to kind of the nitty-gritty of how all of this works, because we hear about this bundling complaint a lot, but it always happens. It keeps happening. And you were talking a little bit earlier about how sometimes some of that is just the way the system is set up.
Sure. I mean, when we talk about education and we talk about constitutional funding, it becomes our obligation through the Gannon decision to provide that additional $1 billion worth of funding. And when we make that kind of commitment, then we ask our schools to, in return, provide a similar type of commitment, which does include accountability, transparency, and oftentimes expanding opportunities for all students. And that's what this bill aims to do and does.
And yet there are a lot of people who have some serious objections to what's in the bill.
Well, yeah, I mean, there always are.
Well, that's true. That's politics.
But I don't know. I think funding bills are kind of funny. You know, it's like they're just, you know, they just become these like Christmas trees that you hang ornaments on, and you know, I don't know if these policies that are in this bill would get passed on standalone basis. The overall bill doesn't appear to have a veto-proof majority at this point. And I'm not entirely sure whether the governor could veto pieces of it if she wanted to. So, do you know that, Kristen?
Yeah, it's a policy bill, and so in the House, it has appropriations that have pay-go rules, but outside of that, it's a policy bill, so it doesn't allow for individual line items to be vetoed, such as an appropriations bill that doesn't have any statutory long-term effect. It has provisos in it.
Okay, so this is a policy bill
Yes.
and not a funding bill. let's
Right.
say. Okay.
It has
Policy bill
funding.
with funding in
Right,
it.
correct, yes.
So, okay.
Yeah, and those are kind of like the little nitty-gritty details that to the casual observer are kind of hard to understand if you even learn. I mean, you and I have been covering the State House for a long time, and we still had questions.
Yeah, I mean, and it's, I mean, school funding, and that's always going to be super controversial.
And talking about controversial, the future of that special education funding bill with the educational savings account, that's now in the hands of a conference committee as the Senate and House try to work out differences in their two versions of the bill. So what does the governor think of all this? Would she veto it? Rebecca.
Well, Governor Kelly says she's against bills like this that take money away from public schools. Republicans are also split on this issue. Even with money for special education and teacher pay raises, this bill narrowly passed the House. Kansas Governor Laura Kelly is weighing in on a school choice bill moving through the legislature.
I have never been a proponent of vouchers. I believe that public monies ought to be spent on public schools.
Even though the bill includes money for special education and teacher pay raises, two big ticket items for Democrats, it also creates an education savings account. Parents could use the account for private school tuition, school supplies like textbooks, and tutoring. While Democrats call it a school voucher, some Republicans are calling public schools a monopoly.
You can choose where you get your haircut, or you can choose to go to higher education anywhere, but the K through 12 you don't. And when there is a monopoly of money, there is required accountability.
But even with special education money and pay boosts for teachers, Democrats aren't budging.
We're a rural state, so that our public schools are often the hub of the community, and anything to undermine them would be undermining the entire fabric and structure of Kansas.
And this bill passed the House 64 to 61 last week. It's now going to a conference committee with members of both the House and Senate. They'll have to reach an agreement before it moves forward. For now, reporting at the Capitol, I'm Rebecca Chung.
And to be clear, we're talking about a second education bill. You had to front both of them. Both of them had their controversial points. One of them led to some pretty tense moments for you with constituents over the weekend as folks were concerned about the special education funding and specifically the educational savings accounts in it that opponents call vouchers.
Well, sure. And as you and I have talked about many times, it's often difficult for the public to follow all the different movements of the legislature and to understand the process and even the contents of the bill. But I'm so very excited and very proud of the work that's in SB 83. It does provide that additional year of $72 additional of millions of dollars for special education funding. But it also provides for students to learn in a variety of ways, which in Kansas, we should not be restricting how kids can learn best. So I am thrilled that we have this opportunity. And honestly, when the governor says she doesn't support vouchers that provide money to anything other than public schools, I disagree. The governor has a program called KEEP, Kansas Education Enrichment Program, that allows $1,000 for public or private school students for items of enrichment. So in reality, she does support helping kids be the very best they can be.
It's an interesting argument that the $1,000 grants are the same as vouchers. Certainly a lot of folks arguing that the educational savings accounts are the same as vouchers. I think to at least the layman, they look the same.
Well, I can't tell a dime's worth of difference between them. It's basically the same thing. It's a tax credit that you get that you can spend for private schools. You can spend it for homeschool. That's pretty much a voucher. They can't really call them that because there's this constitutional provision that says that funds cannot be used, educational funds cannot be used, cannot be given to religious institutions. So that's a little bit of a holdback, so you have to kind of work around that, and that seems to be what the workaround is.
Well, I'd love to respond to that, if I might.
Feel free.
Actually, the Supreme Court in 4 different occasions has said that when tax dollars are used for any type of institution, they may be used for religious institutions. There is not a violation of the Establishment Clause, and therefore it is perfectly allowable. There have been rulings in Montana, in Maine, and Ohio. So the Blaine Amendment that you're referring to is not unconstitutional. It should not be in our Kansas Constitution. And in terms of the name voucher, you can call it anything you want. I totally agree. But it's about helping kids learn best. It's not a tax credit at all. It's actually a savings account in which parents can use those funds to educate their child in the best possible surrounding. And they can use it for materials, for online classes, for college courses, or they can use it for tutoring. And frankly, the governor called her own program when she released it a voucher program. Later, she called it an educational savings account. So I agree, the name doesn't really matter. What matters is that we're helping kids in Kansas learn and helping them improve. And right now in Kansas, we have too many kids that are being left behind. And when we rank 42nd in the nation for reading 8th graders, that's not good enough. I think Kansans can do better. And so that's why I'm a proponent of choice, which lifts all kids up.
Well, I've had kind of a mixed view on this. There's a part of me that says that this would really hurt the public schools and that we shouldn't do it. And then there's a part of me that says that this could help the public schools because there are a lot of parents in this state who are making a lot of demands of the schools that books be banned, that certain subjects not be taught, that they seem to think that not only can they control their own child's education, but they get to control everybody else's too. And if this bill would get them out of the schools for $5,000 a piece, that may be a price worth paying.
Well, that's certainly an interesting perspective in the fact that it's not banning books. We should always be very careful about what we put in front of our children and make sure they're age appropriate. There are some books that are not age appropriate for 5th graders and 4th graders. There are some books that are not appropriate for the high school, and those librarians and school boards should have that authority and means to make those determinations. Parents should be involved. If you don't want the parents there and you want the kids out, so be it. But ultimately, it's about providing parents the trust and the opportunity to give their child the very best chance to succeed. And right now, for example, in Wichita, of free and reduced lunch students, only 5% are proficient. I don't know about you, but 5% is way too low for me. And many of our kids are succeeding in public schools and will continue to succeed. But for those that are not, let's give them a chance and give them 1/4 of the amount of money that we would spend on the average student in Kansas, which is $20,000.
I'm going to jump in there real quick because talking about school choice, talking about helping students do better. We actually, as a nation, have a history of this. After Brown v. Board, several states went to what they called freedom of choice plans that basically allowed a student to take a voucher, an educational savings account, whatever, but a portion of the base state aid with them to whatever school that they wanted. Any school in the county, any school in the state, but their parents had to get them there. What they found out was that when those plans went into effect, it was kids who were in the upper levels academically already, and kids who were in the upper levels by wealth, their family wealth, that actually benefited. The minorities, African American, Latino, etc., they unfortunately were not in a position to take advantage of those, and they were stuck in the same schools, but those schools had less funding, which is why the Supreme Court actually ruled freedom of choice plans to be illegal and unconstitutional. What's the difference, I guess, is where I'm going with this. What's the difference between those freedom of choice plans and this new concept of school choice?
I think there's a huge difference. First of all, those were public school to public school. Without the transportation, that doesn't really work. For us, we are actually providing these for free and reduced lunch public school students or students that are below grade level in either math or English language arts. So that is one pathway for students. And I can tell you there's a school right here in Wichita with 110 students that are minority students that are excelling and doing better than their 259 peers. And transportation is provided with no public money for that transportation. So I would say where there is a will, there is a way. Where there is a parent that wants to make that opportunity available to their child, we should not prohibit that opportunity. No, it's not going to work for all of our children in Kansas, but for those that it can work for those that may struggle with a very large school, maybe they struggle with the atmosphere of the school, maybe it has nothing to do with the way that their education is delivered, but maybe it's the atmosphere that is not working for them. We need to give them another pathway to success. So the bottom line is, let's not prohibit opportunity. Let's open the door of opportunity and see what happens, and see if that could benefit some of our students that need it most, such as those that are disadvantaged based on the federal poverty level.
But if that school that you're talking about is already doing so well, then why do they need public funding?
They run their budget on a shoestring budget. They have a van that's probably 20 years old that goes around and does that. Their employees do not even make a fraction of what public school employees make. They do not get a pension. So they really have to do this out of earnest love and devotion, not out of any possible benefit financially. Right. And so you can't sustain that forever. And so the way that we can help those individuals, those schools, those future micro schools, is allow more freedom. I think America and Kansas can actually benefit from freedom in giving parents the opportunity to make the best choice. And we can also find in other states that have done this for decades that the public schools actually do better. It's just kind of one of those things where it's healthy competition that lifts all students up, which is amazing.
Well, when the private schools get to choose their students, that's a little bit of an advantage over the public schools.
Well, if they receive the same amount of money that our public schools do, which would be $20,000, then they can all play
we
by...
all know that the $20,000 is not a real number.
It actually is.
No, it's not.
So actually it is.
I was there when they decided how to calculate
Actually, it
that.
is, and I will show you after we're off the air. I'll take you to Kansas Department of Education website, and I will show you that we spend over $9 billion, and I will show you that it's $19,670 approximately per pupil on average. Before we leave, I promise to show you that so you won't
and I will
have
show
a
you
misunderstanding.
the census reports that say what the operational spending
I guess
is.
you can talk to Kansas Department of Education, because that's where I get my numbers for that.
And the legislature ordered Kansas Department of Education to define the numbers that way when they didn't want to.
No, that's not
We're going to leave
correct.
that discussion there, because that's a long-going debate that we're not going to solve today. Moving on, Kansans sexually abused as children, demanding a change in state law they say keeps them from seeking justice. They've been asking for this change for years. This year, they spent every week at the State House lobbying for it. Now they finally got to tell their stories directly to lawmakers. Kate's Jackson Overstreet takes us there.
One by one, survivors of childhood sexual assault shared their experiences with the Kansas Senate Judiciary Committee on Thursday.
Do you love me? I won't let you down. You can trust me like no one else does. You don't want to see my bad side. These are the texts a 48-year-old man sent me a few hours after sexually assaulting me. I was 14.
These survivors, along with lawmakers, are supporting a bill that would drop the statute of limitations for criminal prosecution of childhood sexual abuse. It would also extend the window for a civil case to be filed.
Far too many children are victims of the crime of sexual abuse. Every 68 seconds, an American is sexually assaulted, and every 9 minutes, that victim is a child.
Supporters of the bill say these changes are needed because most people don't disclose that they have been abused until decades after it happened. That's because the nature of what happened to a survivor is so traumatic, according to the Wichita Area Sexual Assault Center.
They finally feel safe to disclose what happened to them. And a lot of times in adulthood, they surround themselves with people who are supportive, who will believe them.
Mary Stoles with Wassac says once survivors finally do come forward, oftentimes their motivation is about more than just them.
I can't tell you how many survivors I hear who say, I'm talking about this now because I know where my perpetrator is and he's around other children.
That sentiment was echoed by survivors when urging lawmakers to pass this bill.
This bill will save countless children from the horror that I endured.
All right, so this issue is a Senate issue, which you guys don't necessarily see until it makes it over to your side. But it appears to have bipartisan support at this point. It certainly has bipartisan sponsors. Is it something that you're hearing about on your side of the building? Is it something that you've seen the lobbyists out there, the survivors who are out there trying to get their point across?
Yes, I'm really excited that they had their day to share their concerns and to be able to really champion some changes in law. We do want some kind of statutory limitations. That is fair as well. So I believe the compromise is the right place to be. I look forward to them bringing it to the House and us having a debate on that.
And I think this is one of the issues where Christy and I agree that, I think there's something that needs to be done here. I don't know exactly what it should be, but you don't want people who abused kids years ago and got away with it to be abusing kids now and getting away with it. No. It can go, this can be generational, is the problem, and
very often is generational.
Yeah, and let's get something passed.
Courageous efforts by the girls.
Yeah, and it's something that's very difficult for survivors to speak out about. It's also something that, you and I have both spent time in the classroom. We know that the science on how trauma affects kids' brains and how kids develop has gone so much deeper now than it did 20, 30 years ago when these laws were first put in place.
And of course, and when someone's in a position of power and they take advantage of that position of power, and that could be a coach, a teacher, a pastor, a boss. It can be anybody that has authority over that child, even a guardian. So yes, we want to give them an opportunity to heal and then to come back full circle in a certain amount of time to address that and to seek justice.
Well, another debate took up hours on the floor of the Kansas House this week over an issue some say doesn't even happen anymore. At question, should the state require physicians to provide life-saving care to infants who survive an abortion?
In my case, or one of my cases, at 20 weeks gestationally, I found out that my baby was dead.
When my doctor brought me the baby, he was fully formed. Eyes, nose, ears, fingers.
Moms, chaplains, and doctors, Kansans who've experienced infant or newborn deaths firsthand, shared their experiences Monday. They were speaking out about a bill that would mandate doctors provide life-giving care if an abortion ends with a living infant. Events like those Representative Dr. John Epley says he experienced early in his career.
Those infants were placed on a table, and that was it. Many of them died within a few minutes, but some lingered for several hours and some lingered longer than that.
The author titled it the Born Alive Bill.
When a cry is heard during an abortion, that is a living child, an infant. And would we choose to make that abortionist a murderer? To me, this bill gives them an out.
Supporters say the mandate would provide doctors with a clear guideline, giving them only one option when an infant survives an abortion, something they say happens more often than Kansans might think.
And over a 3-year period, I was directly or indirectly involved with 27 babies born alive after abortion in one town.
While some Democrats also supported the proposal, others opposed it from medical, financial, legal, and humanitarian angles.
A question was posed as to why could we not just wrap the fetus or at this gestational age and provide comfort and palliative care. I pose this question to the legislators. How do we know this doesn't happen?
We are actively choosing to put Kansas families into medical debt. In rural areas, how far is your local hospital? How much does that ambulance ride cost or that helicopter ride will cost you?
Now, two of the lawmakers you just heard are also doctors. They spoke on this issue relating events that happened in the 1970s and 1980s. The American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology says that doesn't happen anymore with modern abortion care. So the question is, why is this an issue this year? Is it simply because Republicans are trying to find a way to keep the issue alive without going for a full ban because of last summer's vote.
If a baby survives an abortion and they're alive, then we should do everything we can in a moral society to make sure that they have the best possible chance to either survive or that they're cared for in those minutes, hours, or days before they do pass away. At the same gestational, just like we would for somebody that has the same gestational development. I think it is the best thing that we can do. And if it's not happening today, then this shouldn't be controversial. Everybody should vote yes. Let's just ensure that all babies that are born alive are protected.
And we did see Democrats cross the aisle to speak out in favor as well as vote in favor of this bill.
Well, yeah, and you know, I mean, I think this bill is a trap on a couple of levels. It's a political trap because somebody can put out a postcard saying that if you vote against this bill, that you're voting against babies. You're voting against saving babies. And the reality is that, you know, there are, now this bill, I've read through it several times and I'm trying to figure out the problem that it's trying to address because, you know, it's not, I mean, you know, this is if this was Jeopardy, this would be the category of things that never happen. You know, and I wonder too what would happen in emergency situations where a woman is spontaneously aborting. If you look at the definition carefully, it says natural expulsion. So would a catastrophic pregnancy in which a baby is born with obviously unsurvivable conditions, is it more compassionate to put them in a box on life support with, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars bills piling up for the parents, or would it be more compassionate to just let them hold their baby?
And I don't think that's what this bill does. It just says for the same gestational development in the same type of condition that you would for any other child, that's the treatment you give. If they're not going to survive, and we know that, let's say they're 21 weeks, then you'd provide that comfort and care as you just mentioned. It does not mean that they're going to go and place them in the ICU. It does mean that those babies will not just be left to cry or to lay without anybody holding, touching, or trying to provide the necessary care.
All right, and we're going to leave it there because we are out of time. Thank you both, Diane and Christy, for being with us this week. We'd also like to thank our news partners at KSN News, Cake News, and the Wichita Eagle for sharing their materials with us. We'd love to hear what you have to think. Just send us an email at kansasweek@kpts.org. For now, stay safe and have a great week.